Hey, what's up everybody? Nexel here. Today we are playing Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, and we have yet another weird event to add on to our slew of weird events that we've been getting for our second anniversary. So this one is going to be a tier 3 or below challenge. It's pretty much going to be a speed run where you can only activate the abilities of tier 3 or lower medals. So once you complete all the quests, you're going to get 300 jewels across 10 different quests, as well as some fun stuff like skip tickets. You get chips, some Dales, some Sids, and I believe the last one has a magic mirror. So not only do you get the 300 jewels for completing it, you also get some fun stuff on the side. So before we get started, there are some general notes, some general tips that I want to give before we even jump into the challenge at all. So the first thing is that while you can't use the abilities of tier 4s or higher, you can still use their skills and you can still use their traits. So what do I mean by that? So this is just an example of that, where I don't want to just slap another second chance onto a medal just so that I can use the skill. I don't want to be wasteful like that. And while I can't use my illustrated Kyrie EX, I can still use the second chance 3 that's attached to it. So the medal is not useless. Tier 4s are not useless, especially if you have skills that you want to put on them, like defense boosts, like second chances. Those still proc when, they activate. So you can still use the skills, which is really good. What do I mean by using the traits? So, for example, let's go ahead and hop into our medals. Let's say you want to have something with like extra attack and aerial. So obviously my Master Xehanort is a tier 7 medal and I can't use his skill, but if I'm pressed for damage and really I just want to go through it quickly, I can use this medal because it has aerial enemy defense minus 60 and it has extra attack, meaning that I'll get 2 attacks with this medal and it will give the aerial enemy defense minus 60. So it'll still do a reasonable amount of damage for a tap, which is sometimes necessary because you don't want to spend all the time activating your skills where you can just tap the screen, just punch the enemy normally with tap attacks, with swipe attacks, and still get the time as small as you possibly can. So again, tier 4s and higher, they're not necessarily useless. You can't use their abilities, and that does make them less favorable to use, but you can still use the skills and the traits that are attached to them. The next thing is that when we look at our actual objectives, one of the most important things to note is that you don't have to fight all the enemies except for this one. In this particular quest, you have to fight all the enemies, but all these other ones complete within a certain amount of seconds, complete without having to continue, inflict a certain amount of damage, defeat the invisible. So a lot of these don't have the defeat all enemies requirement. So what that means for us is that we can just skip to the very end and just fight the boss in order to shrink our time. So I know sometimes people feel obligated to fight all the enemies because that's just what we do. You see a Heartless, you want to take it out. But for these challenges, you don't even have to bother. Just run to the objective enemy if you can, do that, and then just spend all your time defeating that rather than wasting time on something that's not going to pretty much give you anything. The next thing is that each of these quests, again, this is pretty basic math, but if you get 300 jewels across 10 quests, they all have 30 jewels. You don't have to worry about like the last one giving 100 and then everything before that giving like a lower amount. So everything should be giving you 30 jewels at a time. One other tip that I'd like to give is that if possible, try and shrink the number of hits that your medal is doing. So for example, you want to stick to about like a 1 to 2 to 4 range for the amount of hits that the medal does, because the more hits that a medal does, the more time it takes to just watch through the sequence, and then at that point you're just wasting time when you could be using it for other things. So things like Piglet, for example, it just does 1 hit. Kingdom Hearts Kyrie does 1 hit. Sebastian does 1 hit. So there are a lot of medals where they only do like 1 hit and they can still do useful things like buffer, and those are ones you're going to want to target. This is kind of a bad scenario because I use Axel B and Cyax B here, which do like sizable amounts of hits. I mean, the Axel B does 11 and the Cyax B does 12, but a good example of this is actually Hercules and Phil. So Hercules and Phil will only do 1 hit, and that's going to shrink the animation time, thus saving me more time to try and keep me under the limit for the objective. Another piece of advice, and this is kind of up to you at this point because this one is plus or minus based on what you're using it for, I would try and remove extra attack from your attacking medals as much as possible, because they don't do as much damage the second time around, and that's gonna potentially extend how long you're going to be fighting, and that's going to increase your time and then make it harder for you to get below that usual 120 seconds that they want to keep us below, and sometimes even below 100 seconds. One of the best medals for this challenge is going to be, actually, if I could pull them up, do I have any right here? Let's go ahead, do tier 3, let's do all, and let's do buff general strength. Here we go. Alright, so the Neku or Joshua or Shiki medals, these guys are fantastic medals, because while they do a bunch of hits, they still give you plus the general strength. And not only that, they're going to remove status buffs. So things that have like enhanced defense or things that have enhanced strength, you know, you can remove those instantly with one of these medals, and that makes them particularly useful for this challenge. Another piece of advice is don't waste resources just to complete this challenge. It's only 300 jewels, and when you think about it, 300 jewels essentially can get you like a single medal pull, and that's about it. Like, it can't buy you avatar boards to compensate for skills that you use to complete this challenge. It's not going to be able to do pretty much any reasonable amount of pulls to get something good. So don't really, you know, bust out a bunch of jewels in order to complete this challenge. It's not that big of a deal. It's only just a few skip tickets, chips, Dales, a magic mirror, some Sids, and again, just 300 jewels. So if you're spending pretty much any more than 300 jewels to complete this challenge, I don't think it's a good idea to pretty much spend any amount of resource to do this. Like, for example, don't throw away second chances if you don't have to, or if you don't have extras. I know with the newcomer deal, it's pretty easy to get a bunch of extra second chances, but yeah, just don't be wasteful with your resources. It's not that big of a deal. It's a pretty minor event. 300 jewels is an okay amount, but that's really, it's not even the amount of jewels we get per day just by logging in and completing daily quests. So don't waste resources in order to finish this challenge. Last thing that I want to say is that you're still going to follow the general Keyblade rules of wanting to have general strength up. So there are quite a few tier 3 and lower medals that do raise general strength. So let's go ahead. Let me just show you some of the ones I got here. So Piglet's a good one. Zexion B was another one. Obviously the Neku or the Joshua or the Shiki. The Uniform Kyrie is going to do it. The Selfie and some of the Ys. Christmas Town Sora, the Nick and Judy that we got for Union Cross, as well as for last year during October. So you have pretty much a solid amount of choices. My personal choice is going to be Lucifer, just because Lucifer has 0 cost and it targets single enemies. So it's my preferred one to raise general strength. Also, the one that I have has extra attack on it. So that's the one I prefer if I'm not using Neku or Joshua or Shiki, because these things have a 5 gauge cost, and that is pretty hefty. Those are pretty much all the tips that I have. I'll make a separate video for the actual guide for stages 6 to 10, because those are really the only ones that matter. Stages 1 to 5, you should just be able to complete with even just a hodgepodge, just put together list of medals. They're not too difficult, because when you look at the actual challenge itself, Stage 5, I believe the enemies don't even exceed they don't even exceed 100. So pretty much up to Stage 5, there aren't really many tricks. You just go through the stage, and then just take out the target enemy, and that's all you gotta do for the most part. So I will make a guide for stages 6 through 10. Be on the lookout for that video. But for now, these are just the tips that I used in order to succeed in this event. And that should be it. If you guys have any questions or comments or concerns on the tips, feel free to throw them in the comments below, and I will try my best to answer them. If you need any sort of recommendations with setups or anything like that, again, feel free to just hit me up with a message, and I will try my best to help you. But that's all for now, everyone. Until next time, take it easy.